The thing that really changed the way we do business was the spatial database developed as part of the revision, and that was released at the North American in Kansas City in 2011. So what we're going to talk about now is implementation of that conservation planning. Next slide. One key thing that has occurred is many conservation organizations outside of the quail world have become involved in quail priorities because of the spatial database. So I have a list here. National Wild Turkey Federation, of course, a result of our MOU last September, are starting to work with the database, and many others, whether it's the LCC, Land Bird Working Group, and very importantly, many states are stepping down the information in that spatial database to their state quail plans. Next. So the beauty of it, of course, with GIS is it's very scalable from whatever level you want it to go, nationally, LCCs, down to focus areas, and so that's what we're going to focus on here. Next slide. As part of this shrinking down, we've at the same time wanted to make sure that we still kept priorities for larger landscapes. And the focus area thing that we're going to talk about is pretty small, so that's very important in the context of all the conservation efforts beyond bobwhites that are much bigger. And so one proposed way to look at this is that we would have really 3 different tiers for looking at the bobwhite landscape. Regional, and this is an example from Georgia where only parts of Georgia are part of their bobwhite quail priority areas. You shrink this region down to a smaller one, and then finally down to focus areas. And the thing about this plan, using larger landscapes, is it's still that the #1 priority is that each state will actually use the focus area approach. Okay, next. Okay, what does the focus area concept mean for a state? Well, the quail population goals in the revision are stated this way. They're stated that they are actually hypotheses that need to be tested through adaptive management. So that's exactly what we're doing. We know a lot about putting bobwhite habitat on the ground and getting results at the farm level, but when we go to larger landscapes, we're not so good. So that's that we're following the protocol identified in that revision. Next slide. So the answer to testing hypotheses, but this is not a science sort of thing. It's really about learning and doing experiments, putting habitat on the ground, measuring response of birds, not only quail but a suite of songbirds to those habitat. This will provide credibility when we try to expand this at a larger scale. And it is progressing towards the big quail population goals in the NBCI revision. Next slide. When I talk about the NBCI model focus area problem, we're really talking about this group of people that have worked so far on this. Many people have collaborated over the last 2 years to get us to this point. People from various state agencies, joint ventures, universities, and so forth. Next slide. So many people have collaborated on this, and we're about 3/4 of the way through. Timeline-wise, here's what it looks like. We started in January 2012 with the Coordinators Monitoring Survey, which we reported to this group that March. Next, just click through these. In May of that year, we had our first what we called working group, and that was at Shaker Village in Kentucky. Came out of there with a draft plan. Next. Then we brought that to the coordinators meeting last August in Abilene, Texas for their review. Next. We followed that with another working group meeting at Shaker Village in Kentucky where we worked on habitat plus issues that came up during the review in Abilene. Next. Right now, February 2013, we're working on this pilot state concept, and I'll talk more about that in a second. What's coming up is the coordinators meeting in Roanoke in July, and then finally the final plan, the final product by the end of the year. Next slide. So as you can see, there's been a much collaboration at various levels, whether it's with management board meetings. We've been talking about this this is at least the 3rd meeting. NBTC steering committee meetings, these working group meetings, etc. And when it comes down to it, there have been really weekly phone calls amongst a small group. This is led by John Morgan from Kentucky, their quill coordinator, and then Ken Dern from Ohio has contributed immensely. So the three of us have been kind of the three keeping things going. Next slide. The major to-dos, and we still have a tremendous amount of work to get done to reach this point in December, is internal and external reviews during the next 2 months. Coming to Roanoke with not only a just about final draft, waiting for the coordinators to have their final input, but more importantly, as Mark talked about, the pilot states will be presenting their projects and what they learned about protocol and what it's going to cost in the terms of manpower and money to implement a model focus area. Okay, next slide. Okay, these are the pilot states and the people that are leading the effort in each state. So you see we have 7. One of these, Ohio, they're primarily focusing on habitat and not some of the larger scale issues, but all the other states are implementing the model focus area as we have it designed at this point to test and learn. Okay, next slide. And so when we're talking about a model focus area, here's what it looks like. There are the states listed on the left, the land use. Some are going to be public wildlife management areas. Ag represents private land, so it's a mixture of public, in some cases, all private in some cases, and a mixture in other cases. So that's exactly what we want. We want to look at that broad spectrum of where to do conservation. The total acres in a focus area are typically around 5,000 to 6,000 acres, some a little bigger here in Texas. And here's what it means getting on the ground. In addition to the habitat work that has to be done, we're measuring birds in almost all cases in spring and fall, and then measuring habitat in spring. So a lot of training is going to be involved in staff on the ground making these measurements. So that's really the commitment, is to this monitoring of habitat and birds. And as I mentioned, Ohio is actually just doing detailed tests of the various habitat classification systems we have. Next slide. The goal of the Model Focus Area program for focus areas, they reach 50% and I have NBCI in parentheses because the quail density goals in the plan were actually derived by each state, so it's really their goal, but it's labeled NBCI. Reach half of that in 5 years and all of it within 10 years. The minimum size of a focus area or the amount of managed bobwhite habitat within, let's say, a 6,000 acre area is 1,500 acres. Next slide. And the real important thing that's really a stretch is that we want to make sure we have reference areas or a control area so that each state coordinator has what I call a knowledge insurance policy. If they don't reach their quail population goals, did they have very bad weather, and is that focus area doing better than the control or reference area, but maybe not reaching population goals? So it's a way to explain your results, and I look at that as an insurance policy, something that's very important for a coordinator to have.